This is just completely outrageous. This whole the way this has been spun up in the aftermath of the media, it's incredible. Now I've been covering the Syrian conflict since day one, even before day one, technically, and also I've spent time on the ground even during the war there, in some of these areas, the battle zone or ex-battle zones. I was fortunate enough to be able to survey the damage in East Aleppo and Palmyra. And Homs and places like this, as well as around Damascus. So, and what you're seeing here is there's no debate. This is HTS is an absolute rebrand of Al Qaeda in Syria, Jabhat al-Nusra, ISIS are all synonymous, and the Free Syrian Army, all synonymous. The Syrian National Army, the same thing. Turkey's little construct that they built out of the Free Syrian Army.
Well, so let me ask you a question, because you probably know, because I've heard that he had these run-ins with Al Qaeda and run-ins with ISIS, and he was going against them. Was his disagreement over fundamentals, like what the group should be going after, or was there something else?
I really don't believe a lot of the cover stories in the media around someone like this. If you study Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and you look at al-Jalani, it's not his real name, by the way. I think his real name was just released. That's another story. But yeah. I mean, you could make the argument that in some degree, and this might have sounded conspiratorial 10 years ago, but that he was sheep dipped out of Camp Bucca. And that the establishment of an Al Qaeda in Syria branch is not an organic thing. There are external powers that are shaping these battlefields, like the United States, like Turkey, NATO ostensibly, and Israel as well as Gulf states. Okay, they poured tons of resources and money into crushing Syria, to destabilize it, to overthrow the Assad government, the Syrian state, since 2011. This is a proven beyond any doubt. So why wouldn't they be involved in some of these terrorist factions that have sprung up in Syria and Iraq and places like this that magically don't ever attack Israel, but are sort of hell-bent on overthrowing the government there? And I think this is just a perfect example of it. This is a foreign-backed terrorist army, armed by foreign powers, paid for by foreign powers, with foreign fighters dispatched in to basically overrun the country of Syria. And they didn't just overthrow the Assad regime. They collapsed the Syrian state. They don't have an economy right now. Then it's going to be, what you're looking at here is they're celebrating for the next few days, and everybody's kind of high on this kind of Arab Spring, hopium, short-term fix, dopamine rush. But it's the black flag is flying over Damascus. This is ISIS. This is Al Qaeda. It's the same ideology. It's the same fighters. And this is not going to be a pluralistic democratic society. What is going to happen, Daniel, I predict, and I'm sad to say this, but it's going to, the country and the region is going to descend into a violent civil war. There's going to be a bloodbath in Syria. That's, by all accounts, that's what looks like is shaping up. And that precedes the breakup of Syria. The breakup of Syria, it's already balkanized. The United States, Kurdish control and occupation of a large part of the northeast of Syria, 25% of the landmass. The U.S. is going to retrench, probably increase their footprint there now under a Trump administration. I doubt they're going to be, exfiltrating from really hard strategic positions there. Israel certainly doesn't want the United States to leave, because that's going to cut a nice path to Iraqi Kurdistan right up to the Iranian border. And so you're going to see the focus shift towards Iran. That's why this is a monumentous event that we're seeing. This is right, 6-day war, Yom Kippur. This is equally as significant historically. Israel's already taking Syrian territory, has obliterated the Syrian military, all of their infrastructure, their government intelligence buildings, bureaucracies have been all hit in airstrikes. This is the largest amount of Israeli airstrikes in a day in the history of the country, I think. I think they did 250 in 24 hours or something like that.
I think it's up to around 400 in the 48 hours, just obliterating everything. And I want to jump on something you said there about the Iran factor. because there are a lot in the United States, and this is probably part and parcel to what you were talking about a while ago in terms of what the, this elite group of cabal or whatever it is wanted to do in Russia. They also have their sights on some stuff in the Middle East, i.e. on Iran. And here was, unfortunately, one of my former commanders, H.R. McMaster, talking about what a great opportunity we have before us today.
Has the opportunity to challenge that conventional wisdom and put into place some really major shifts in U.S. foreign policy, I think especially in the Middle East at this moment.
What do you think happens there? Because I do have this from him. He has issued a warning on Trump on Truth Social with a post there. He says, if the hostages aren't released prior to January 20th, 2025, the date I proudly assume office as president of the United States, there will be, quote, all hell to pay in the Middle East. He says he wants those hostages home before he is sworn in. How do you think a policy shift happens with him in that situation?
Okay, well, first of all, I love it because there's been so much talk about, well, we need to cease fire in Gaza. We need, no, actually, until Hamas is destroyed, in my belief, you can't have any better life for the Palestinians. And certainly, you have to get the hostages back. So I would like to see us working more actively with the Israelis and others to get the hostages back, but also to make Iran pay the price for their terrorist and proxy network across the region. There's a huge opportunity at this moment.
A huge opportunity at this moment. Finally, we can go and kill Iran with another war.
I don't know where to start. There are so many there's so many tropes and deceptions in everything that he said there. It'll take all day to unpack it. I mean, what hell to pay? Are the Palestinians gonna feel from incoming Trump administration? What's he gonna do? Bomb Gaza? Israel's already done that. It's a parking lot. Okay, they can't suffer anymore. There's an ongoing genocide. I'm sorry to use the G word for some people that don't recognize still that that's happened, but it is happening. And so they're not going to make the Palestinians suffer any more than they already are, and they're not going to eliminate Hamas by pushing that, maybe if the plan is what McMaster's talking about is pushing the remaining Palestinian population into the Sinai Desert and then emptying out the West Bank into Jordan, maybe, okay, that kind of makes sense from that sort of twisted view of the situation. But, what he wants, what McMaster wants is to expand the U.S. war machine in the Middle East, to re-expand, because the United States has been pulling back in recent years. They've been trying to execute a policy of offshore balancing since the Iraq War, since the Bush administration. And what it's done is just created a cauldron of constant conflicts in the Middle East. And even the Abraham Accords I'll throw in there as well. This did a lot to create the October 7th situation as well. So this is what these people want. This is what they, and he's talking about Iran's terror proxies. The United States has backed an Al-Qaeda takeover of the Syrian Arab Republic. This was the last pluralistic, secular Arab state in the area. I mean, Iraq as well, but put Iraq off to the side. Lebanon as well, but it's been there as a sort of standard bearer for a secular Arab nation state. Whether you like Bashar al-Assad and his father or not, that's a reality. The black flag is flying over Aleppo and Damascus. The United States has backed, materially supported, and Turkey and Israel and Qatar and other Gulf allies have materially supported an Al-Qaeda, a radical Islamist takeover of a country like Syria, the birthplace of Christianity in the world. And you may not be able to ever walk down the streets of the old city of Damascus and visit the chapel of St. Paul, which I've done, or go to an Aramaic community like Malula, or to walk the road to Damascus, as Saul of Tarsus did. You might not be. There were 8 million tourists going there before hostilities broke out in 2011, and we have been. It's in our policy papers. You can trace the U.S. policy to decapitate the leadership of Syria. You can trace it all the way back 50 years, but it becomes formal policy in the 1990s, and it becomes formal Israeli policy coalescing with U.S. policy from Richard Pearl and the neocons in the 90s who codified that in the Clean Break document, and that became that was the beginnings of everything that we saw running up to 2011. The United States, and what McMaster and all these other war hawks will never say is the United States have put a vice grip of sanctions on Syria, have strangled the country from 2011, put an embargo on it, are occupying their oil fields, occupying their gas, their wheat, their agriculture, their power, their hydro, electricity, fresh water. They've stolen all of that with their Kurdish proxies while simultaneously strangling Syria economically to create maximum pressure, as Mike Pompeo puts it, to force the people to rise up and overthrow Assad. Well, the people didn't rise up. It came from outside of Syria. This was a Turkish, NATO, Gulf, Israeli, US-backed, foreign, radical Islamic terrorist army that has overrun a country that will now, the state of Syria is effectively dead right now. Israel took out their defense, so it's not a sovereign country anymore. It is now going to be totally reliant on its foreign managers, which will be divided between Turkey, the United States, Israel, and then it will be funded, the Gulf will be injecting money in there to try to get an ROI, like a pipeline through there, something like that with Qatar. But that's the reality. There's no sovereignty there. Executions on the street and reprisal killings are happening daily now in Syria. That's not a democracy.
Yeah, and that's you don't ever hear that on the mainstream media, or at least I haven't heard that, but I certainly see it in a lot of places on social media. And I want to play one last clip here, which is it's really embarrassing to see. I've had John Kirby on clips of him on here on our show many times, and a lot of things he says doesn't make sense, or he's just giving a mouthpiece to what the administration is doing. This one, I think, is much more illustrative of some of the more dangerous aspects that I think that you can see right away. And in fact, I'm not even going to set this up. I'm going to let you watch it fresh. Check this out.
John, do we have confirmation of these attacks that Israel has been waging on Syria?
Yeah.
It says that it has virtually destroyed Syria's navy. Is that so?
I will let the Israelis speak for their operations and the results of those operations. They, of course, have a right to defend themselves, and we recognize that they want to properly assess the threat coming from Syria over that Golan Heights or near the Golan Heights.
They have a right to defend themselves, the Israeli did. All those 400 airstrikes, apparently there was a real risk. I mean, what do you make of that?
That's just, it's hard to take someone like John Kirby seriously. He's just been doing the same sort of ventriloquist propaganda act now for I don't know how many years in his different spokespersons positions with the Pentagon, the State Department. It's kind of ridiculous at this point. Israel taking other countries' sovereign territory, formally annexing it, and also, Lebanese territory they're occupying. They've stolen a good chunk of Syrian territory. That's not defending yourself. But that goes to show you that that's what was standing in the way with the previous Syrian government and the Syrian state. They were preventing Israel from doing it because Israel knew that they would defend their position and strike back, that they had viable air defenses, that Israel could take losses if they tried to do what they've just done over the last 72 or 4 or 5 days, that there would be a price to pay. Once you've removed the government, once you've allowed ISIS and Al-Qaeda to come and overrun the country, and then basically at that point you can do whatever you want to Syria. So it won't function as a state. John Kirby, there's a whole bunch of sort of tropes that he's interwoven into that are kind of ridiculous on their face, and it makes me wonder. I don't know how these people, none of these people have spent any time on the ground in the Middle East, and the green zone doesn't count, I'm afraid. But I'm talking about in any of these countries, to know what absolute hell on earth U.S. policy and U.S.'s allied policies have created for people in that country. But we tell ourselves that that's all for the greater good because there's nothing worse in the world than Bashar al-Assad. Assad didn't destroy the economy in Syria. As much as we want to make that the blame and say he deserves sanctions, he deserved to have his for the United States to illegally occupy 25% of Syrian territory since 2017. He deserved all that. And deserved to have an Al-Qaeda Islamic State of Idlib forming within his country, backed by Turkey and NATO. He deserved that because he's an evil dictator. I mean, this is just the ridiculous kind of framing that we've seen with Saddam Hussein, we've seen with Muammar Gaddafi. So you have, 1 or 2 failed states there. This will be a failed state, Daniel. This is going to be a disaster. of epic proportions. Do you realize you practically have an ISIS caliphate full on Europe's border? There's unlimited amount of things that can go wrong here, and that could draw us in. And this is what it's really about, Daniel. Is you have Donald Trump coming in making these hawkish peacenik sort of sounding overtures about conflict. But when it comes to the Middle East, that might be true with Russia, and it might happen. But with the Middle East, Donald Trump will be pushed into a position where he will be compelled to escalate because of a threat from ISIS or something like this. This is where things are headed. And it's a reestablishment of U.S. position, because what does Israel want? What the Trump administration wants in the Middle East is determined by what Israel wants, and Israel wants a bigger U.S. presence.
Yeah, and that's already being set up. In fact, I don't know, Gary, if you have it handy about the Jake Sullivan. Is that handy? I'm looking at you down there. It doesn't matter. We played it before, where Jake Sullivan came out a couple of days ago and was asked about our presence in Syria.
We have a presence both in Iraq and in Syria. That presence in Syria is there to work hand in hand with local partners to continue to suppress the threat that ISIS has posed going back many years now. And we've had significant progress in that fight just even in the last few months. Major players taken off the battlefield, large-scale degradation of those ISIS forces. But of course, an event like this happens, and ISIS immediately looks to take advantage, and we have seen reports.
Yeah, that's enough on that, Gary. That you see, he is absolutely laying the groundwork for the Trump administration. You can't get those troops out of Syria. You've got to pit. My God, ISIS. They just keep waving that banner up there, because it scares people, almost like communists used to in the last century in our country here. And I worry a lot about that the McMasters and the Sullivans and all these other people are just trying to maneuver Trump into where when he comes in, he's going to have to go after Iran, because now also the IAEA came out a few days back and says that Iran is now close to weapons grade. They're building their stockpile. It'll take this much to go. And as I had Ambassador Chaz Freeman on the show a few days ago, he said, basically, we're doing everything in our power to compel Iran to conclude that their only means of self-defense is to go nuclear, which I think will then be used as a casus belli, that we have to go to war.
What all these military experts and commanders and stuff like that, and think tankers, what they'll never tell you is that in Syria, ISIS was flushed out, was obliterated in reality by the Russian Air Force, the Syrian Arab Army, Hezbollah, Iranian Quds forces, and also some Hashd al-Shabi PMUs that came over from Iraq. In the areas controlled by the Syrian government, ISIS doesn't exist. ISIS has been allowed to exist in the areas that the United States has been custodially managing since 2017. And is that a coincidence? ISIS was flushed out of Iraq because of the PMUs, because of the Shiite militia, because of the Hashd al-Shabi, the Iraqi Islamic resistance, and so forth. They mobilized. There was a fatwa when ISIS came on the scene in July 2014, and all of these people, they created these people's mobilization units, 120, 150,000 strong collectively. They did all the ground fighting with Iranian special forces, with Qasem Soleimani, with Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes, who was in the car with Soleimani when he was killed, who was also killed in that decapitation. So they defeated ISIS on the ground. Those were Yazidi militias, Christian militias, Sunni militias in Iraq, not just all Shiite, Fali Kurdish militias as well. It was a total broad-based effort in Iraqi society to deal with ISIS because the United States wasn't doing it. The United States carpet bombed Mosul and Raqqa and would do a lot of air sorties and push ISIS around. They would move ISIS around, but they couldn't eliminate ISIS. That work was done on the ground by the people that, McMaster, like Mike Pompeo, call terrorists. Iranian special forces, Hashid. They proscribed all of these organizations as terrorists because they were fighting ISIS. So, anybody who fights ISIS, who gets in the way of this key instrument, this Swiss Army knife that you can just unleash anywhere in the Middle East. Anybody who gets in the way of this is going to be labeled as a terrorist group or an Iranian proxy. Hezbollah did more on the people in Syria, how many lives Hezbollah saved by holding back ISIS and defeating al-Nusra in a lot of these areas. And all of that for all the Syrians who lived in relative peace since the Astana agreement, the ceasefire agreement, was inked in 2017 and 18. All of that was lost. All of that is lost because what's coming now is basically a free-for-all in Syria and Iraq. There's nothing to stop the black flag from going for Mosul again, just over the border. And will the U.S. stand in the way of that? Will they stop them from marching to Palmyra through the desert, 250 miles? Any satellite could see. No, they will march to Palmyra. They'll march wherever they darn well want. And then we'll react and say that we're dealing with the problem. And we need more Air Force. We need more money. We need to increase the defense budget to increase our presence. And also back in Iraq, because the U.S. has been pushed out of Iraq because it's politically become very untenable. Iraqi parliament has asked them to leave twice. The U.S. said, no, we're not leaving. So they need an excuse. Donald Trump would be the ideal person to sell the battle against ISIS 2.0 and the re-escalation in the Middle East. Donald Trump would be the perfect U.S. president to sell this. They will make him into a war hawk one way or another.
And it's funny because one of the persons who can help guard against that is Tulsi Gabbard. And he is placed in one of the most key positions, the Director of National Intelligence, which has just made the neocon group has just gone on fire. Trying to do everything they can to sabotage her more than any other nominee, and that even includes Gates. And so the Wall Street Journal opinion section from the editorial board, not even just somebody, but the editorial board just went crazy after her this morning, which I tweeted about, kind of exposing it. But in the last few minutes we have here, I wonder if you can talk about what this tells you about the state of play, that they want to make certain that somebody of Tulsi Gabbard's qualifications is not given Trump the intelligence information he needs.
Well, you can look at this two ways. I mean, you could look at it that they're trying to take her out of the running for this position. I mean, by sort of smearing her and whatnot. But this could also be the neocons pushing Tulsi Gabbard, like they pushed Trump and others that might have more, somewhat moderate views on certain conflict zones and so forth in policy. But, she's changed her position a lot. She's much more, while she's more dovish with regards to Ukraine and Russia, like many are, Robert F. Kennedy and some of the people in the Trump camp have been very vocal about that. Tulsi Gabbard has become extremely hawkish against Iran and very pro-Israel. And while she was one of the people, ironically, that was saying that the dirty war on Syria was a huge mistake, while she was a congresswoman, she traveled with Dennis Kucinich to Syria. She did that, which I think was a very honorable trip to try to find out what was really going on the ground. She did basically done a U-turn, and she really, all of her Middle Eastern positions are totally in line with what Israel and what the Israeli lobby are advocating for. And she's also become very Sunni versus Shiite and, radical Islam, putting the real focus on that. So as DNI, she doesn't really have much power, although she curates intelligence that's given to her by John Radcliffe and other agencies. So I can see that. But at the end of the day, the DNI, it can't really take an independent direction. It's really going to be, she's going to be presenting intelligence coming from the different intelligence agencies. But I think the establishment consensus, that's what really matters. And they will most certainly get the Michael Flynn treatment if a DNI goes away from the establishment consensus. You saw what happened.
Yeah. And the thing that really upset me the most, or alarmed me, maybe not upset me, just alarmed me, is the and you've talked about this in regards to several other things already in this show, is that they changed the historical narrative to be a fictitious one that didn't actually exist, and said that, anyone who's arguing against, like what the McMasters are saying and several of these, all these other people that we're talking about here about, we have to fight, we have to do this, we have to do that. They're just demonizing anyone who says anything besides that. And I'm sure that includes you and I and several others that are like us that tell the truth. But that's just a part of the price I guess we have to pay. But I can assure you, we're going to keep telling the truth here and exposing this kind of nonsense. And you know what worries me the most, Patrick, and I know we're almost out of time here, is that this stuff can work for a long time. But at some point, when these people get enough power and they succeed at getting the wars they want, we may find ourselves one day in a very, very bad situation. And the price that we could all pay could be extraordinary.
Sure. I mean, when we're talking about any of these cabinet picks, Tulsi Gabbard, anybody coming in the Trump team, the real black pill to swallow here is that the Washington machine will turn you into a yes man or a yes woman in some of these positions, even if you maybe weren't so much that going into the job. And that's the big challenge, is will we get leadership and executive that is truly independent of this Washington blob, this foreign policy blob that, let's face it, whether it's the Obama wing of the deep state or whether it's the neocon wing, i.e. and the Israeli lobby wing, they both have more or less the same long-term goals, but it's just the arguments over how they're going to get there. What path they're going to take. But you see this overwhelming continuity. It would take a very extraordinary executive and extraordinary cabinet to change that. The question is, will they do that? Because we're not even talking about the China conversation, and that's seen as an existential challenge to American power going forward into the 21st century.
Yeah.
So that becomes another thing. And Syria is very connected to China. With the Middle East is absolutely Iran so connected to China because of the Belt and Road Initiative, and because of the BRICS.
Yeah.
Initiative. So all these things are absolutely connected, especially Syria, by the way, because the cauldron that could explode right now because of what we've seen, the collapse of the Syrian government and society and the state, what's coming next could have such a destabilizing effect on the entire region. And, even if we don't get World War III as people, imagine it in their worst nightmares, what you can get is incredible disruption economically, and hyperinflation and energy crises, and all these things could happen as a result. So we have to go into this next term eyes wide open on this.
We do, and we're going to continue. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it right there. I've just been alerted that I'm actually late for another engagement. I have to go on somebody else's show. I apologize for the brief exit here, but I appreciate you coming on, and we'll have to have you back on and talk about this China stuff, because that's another whole episode we need to talk about. Thank you for coming on today. Thank you guys for being on with us. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.